Good morning, everyone. I'd like to join our speakers in welcoming you all to Cybersecurity Made Simple, the first virtual summit held by the NeoCyber Institute. We have a great conference planned for you guys today, beginning with our talk on incident response plans. We do welcome audience questions through all the talks, and all of our speakers will have a short Q&A section at the end of each of their presentations. So to submit a question, just click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can submit them, and then my colleague Madeline and I will be asking the presenters each of your questions at the conclusion of their talk. Each talk will be about 30 minutes, including the Q&A section. And then at the end of our talk, we'll give a short overview of the conference. So my name is Catherine Miri, and I'm the founder and president of the NeoCyber Institute. I live in Austin, Texas, and I discovered cybersecurity during my sophomore year of high school. Working with me is Madeline, who will introduce herself as well.
So hello, everybody. My name is Madeline Estey, and I'm the vice president of the NeoCyber Institute. So I'm a student from Morristown, New Jersey, and I probably discovered the field of cybersecurity around the same time as Catherine did through online capture the flag style cybersecurity competitions. And before we continue, we'd also like to say that the remaining students on the NeoCyber leadership team are also present today. So that would be our outreach team, Pat Halsey, Veda Srinivas, and Lena Isthansuk from Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Rhode Island, and then Tristan Lonsway, our technical lead, who's from New York.
So you might be wondering, what is the NeoCyber Institute? Well, the NeoCyber Institute is an organization building a global team of students with the goal of raising awareness of cybersecurity and educating the next generation. We offer resources for students to connect with each other and learn from each other, in addition to working with professionals. Our organization is unique because we allow students to gain hands-on experience by working directly with at-risk groups. So to elaborate, we are currently building a curriculum for our students to begin conducting incident response plan training sessions for at-risk organizations. We will take your group through an interactive tabletop exercise modeling a real threat. Throughout the session, your organization will begin developing an effective, workable plan in the case of an attack.
And then on the student side of our organization, we've been working to get more students interested in cybersecurity and then providing them with resources and a community through which they can advance their skills. And so recently we started a Discord channel and we taught a workshop series to high school students. We currently have about 60 members of the NeoCyber Institute community, and that come from at least 10 different states and 3 different countries. So it's exciting to not only collaborate nationwide, but worldwide. And we definitely look forward to growing both our professional and student networks in the near future. Okay, and so now, as Catherine mentioned, we'll be starting off our conference today with a brief talk on incident response plans. So organizations of all sizes and types face a growing variety of threats, from traditional brute force DDoS attacks or distributed denial of service attacks to more concealed and more harmful ransomware attacks. Most organizations have invested in resources to create an incident response plan, but whether or not this is the case, the sheer volume of attacks that will be attempted makes it very likely that a few attacks are going to get past your defenses. This is where and why a solid incident response plan is needed. It's not simply enough to just defend.
So first up with your incident response plan is preparation. You might originally think that an incident response plan wouldn't actually be needed before an attack, but you would be sorely wrong, unfortunately. Preparation is actually a very important part of any IRP. So adequate preparation covers everything a company should have done before an incident even occurs. So things like having hosted regular incident training and practices, fostering relationships with the CISO teams and the administration, and keeping backups of data from your systems all fall under this category. So this stuff doesn't exactly have as much to do with what's in your incident response plan, but it has everything to do with how you use it. So you should never be cracking open your plan the very first time you hear of a breach. Instead, the plan should be pretty much second nature to everybody involved. Part of preparation is also, like I mentioned, keeping system backups stored all the time. These should be updated regularly. As one strategy in an IRP might actually be to shut off all systems and restore from an old backup, especially in the case of a serious incident. You shouldn't be introducing everybody to your IRP during a breach. Like I said, everybody will just be way too unprepared. What you need to have are regular sessions talking through what to do so that everybody is comfortable with the plan. So incident response skill building is pretty much like any other skill. So here we're going to take driving somewhere new for the very first time. You already have knowledge of the road safety signs, you have the skill to operate the car, and you have practice driving other places you know. So all you have to do is apply these skills in new ways. Maybe there's a new highway or a county road to get somewhere you haven't been before. So just like driving, your team should have a good foundation in the knowledge of the warning signs of a breach, they should have the skill to defuse the threat, and they should have experience in thwarting imaginary practice threats. These foundational skills will allow your team to respond faster, more efficiently, and more cohesively than an unprepared team. So that's why practicing using your incident response plan before anything happens is very important. Madeline's going to talk about specific roles and responsibilities later, but I wanted to really highlight the importance of practicing dealing with a threat. So when you're creating the response plan, check to make sure it includes provisions for ample run-throughs and system backups. Also make sure to acquaint everyone with the plan and each other so that no one is surprised when the day it's needed comes.
So a big part of having a solid incident response plan is figuring out who within your organization is going to take on what role during a cyber crisis. So first, there's the CISO, or the Chief Information Security Officer. So when talking with other professionals who have experience with incident response plans, they noted that oftentimes CISOs are not used to being in the limelight and giving orders, as they tend to have more of an advising role in their day-to-day jobs. So one sort of cultural aspect to keep in mind when creating an IRP plan is to help the CISO get used to directing people, and the people get used to listening to them. In an incident, you need to be comfortable listening, and the CISO has to be comfortable giving orders. So another very important thing to consider is the involvement of the executive team of the business or company during a cyber attack. So executive leadership should be aware of what's going on, but they should not be directing day-to-day operational activities. So the CEO needs to be the CEO, not leading the incident response plan protocol. It's essential for them to pick somebody beneath them who's going to be in charge of managing the incident, so this could very well be the CISO. Now, the time period right after a hack, so the initial 24 hours, is especially important to containing everything. And so because of the fast reaction needed, lack of delegation or clear roles could definitely be detrimental if people are scrambling around and are unsure who to follow. And so while the CEO may not be leading the charge, they need to be aware that no amount of delegation will in any way shield them from the personal consequences of any cyber attack. CEOs must be cyber aware and not passive, so they should not take a completely hands-off approach. This is because when personal data and information is stolen, either of employees or clients, people are going to be looking for somebody to blame, and the CEO or other members of the executive team are often an easy target. Because in the moment when people are panicking, people aren't going to be fixated on who you as a CEO delegated tasks to or who's responsible for what. The CEO, and again, the rest of the members of the executive team, will be the easiest and most prominent targets that people can blame, unfortunately. And depending on the size of your company, this could very well come with a good deal of unwanted media attention. Breaches are widely reported, and in 2019 alone, there were over 11,000, I believe, stories about cyber attacks in the US newspapers. So cybersecurity is very much an issue for CEOs and non-technical employees, just much more potentially on the publicity or media side instead of the technical. But CEOs must also be knowledgeable of the protocols that their company has in place so that if called upon to do so, they can calm worried employees by conveying just how serious they are about the breach and what they're doing to remedy it. And they can only do this if they are keeping themselves up to date on protocols. This is also applicable to anybody else who might be called on to address the media, not just the CEOs. So again, any other non-technical employees. In fact, it might actually be a good idea to instruct employees on what to say, if anything, when asked about the crisis, just so that they are prepared. And so then looking at the last question on this slide, the answer is absolutely yes. Should non-technical insight play a role in designing an IRP plan and executing it? So one way in which the executive team and non-technical employees can be involved in the creation of the plan is to have them really think about your company's largest business risks and how a cyber attack could cause them to materialize. And even when attack is underway, non-technical insight is important. Again, going back to the media side of things as well as several other aspects, but media in particular. And something that is very important across the cyber field as well as other STEM fields really is the ability for technical staff to be able to effectively communicate with peers that have less technical knowledge than they do, or even none at all. So this should definitely be kept in mind when building your plan and also when doing the employee trainings like Catherine mentioned earlier, or protocol run-throughs. And so going back to the leadership in an incident response plan, ultimately the person who knows the most needs to be running the plan. This does not mean, however, that employees do not need to know the plan, because they absolutely do need to know the plan as well as the back of their hand so that they don't accidentally do more harm to the system after an attack or during. And so a good incident response plan, again, as mentioned earlier, is going to be tested fairly often, which not only helps the creators of it refine everything, but allows employees to become accustomed to the protocol. If only the IT team and appointed leaders of the incident response plan are practiced and knowledgeable about the exact plan, this can essentially create a single point of failure, since the leading team might not be available during an attack for some reason, or the leading expert or team might not be in a position to effectively manage all of the moving parts and might be in need of external and non-technical assistance. And so again, this must be kept in mind when determining roles in the IRP plan and designing it. And so I won't say anything more about the people aspect of creating plans, just because this is definitely going to be the focus of several of our panelists today, who will go much more into depth on that topic because that is where their expertise lies.
So, when building your incident response plan, there is, of course, the preparation aspect, but an arguably more important part is the response. So there's 3 priorities within an overall response that a great IRP will cover. So we have a quick poll that I'm going to put up asking everybody what you guys think is the most important response priority. So I'm going to give 30 seconds-ish to answer that. We have forensics, so we need to know who broke in and how. We have supporting the victims, so keeping customers in the loop. And then we have system recovery, stabilizing your own systems first. And as the responses are starting to come in, they're pretty split. So I'll display the results once polling is done. Have a few more seconds of polling. Alrighty, so I'm going to end it, and you all can see that the majority of people selected system recovery, which is actually the first priority. So I'm going to go into a little more depth. The funny thing is, actually, all 3 of these are the 3 priorities that we're going to be talking about. So everyone was right in their own way. So, okay, the first priority, like I said, is returning your systems to normal. Stability is, of course, the prime goal, especially right at the outset of an incident. So in short, you have to get all your ducks back in a very nice, neat row. Good incident response plans will always prioritize recovery. There should be specific concrete actions included in your plan that each individual can take to resecure your systems. The plan that you come up with will need to balance profit versus loss for your own company. Suspending the network that hundreds or maybe even thousands of employees depend on will be a huge hit to any company. But at the same time, having employees continuing to operate on a compromised network is worse. So through talking with some professionals that have experience in incident response planning, we've learned that it's clear that having a defined and rather severe plan that can be put immediately into action is the way to go. In order to ensure that your systems don't get more damaged than they already were, completely shutting it down might be the right call. Now, like Madeline said, the first 24 hours after an attack are the most critical for containing the breach and limiting its impact. This is why the speed and the efficiency of any IRP is critical and definitely separates good plans from bad plans. So keep this in mind when building an IRP. The second priority should be supporting your customers, constituents, or whoever they may be. Everyone tends to jump straight to forensics, but that's actually the third priority. The plan needs to account for, once the threat is immediately dealt with, making sure your dependents' data is safe and that they know what's going on. Administrators are rightly concerned with fixing all of the internal network issues, but often the customers and the general public are left in the dark. Hearing that your data might be stolen over the news leaves a feeling similar to that of a cartoon character falling off a cliff. They're just going about their lives, and then all of a sudden gravity kicks in and their financial data is suddenly in the hands of some hacker. So if your company deals with a lot of people, sensitive data, or is government related, this is especially important. Your consumers need to know how you're rectifying the breach and what steps are being taken to ensure the safe recovery of your systems and their data. And we'll hear some more about supporting cybercrime victims in a later talk. The third priority is figuring out what happened and how things got broken. So this step should come after the threat has been expelled in a less stressful and high intensity environment and after your customers or constituents understand what's happening. But you still need to build this into the plan to improve the systems and prevent similar incidents in the future. Many people think that an incident response plan stops when the incident stops, but that's also not true. What you do after the attack is just as important as what you do during it. During the attack, people will instinctively jump straight to the forensics concerns, wondering who did it and why, and what could have been done to stop it. But these should really come after the systems have been stabilized, like I said. So during this step, a careful and thorough forensics analysis should be conducted. It's very important that everyone understands what to do in the future and what they can do in their own roles to prevent something from happening again. It is easy for people to feel guilty or blame others for the attack, but the important thing is that the holes get fixed and it doesn't happen again. Now we're going to go over a few tips and tricks, little hacks, so to speak, about how to make your incident response plan more effective and more efficient. So the very first good thing that you can do before an attack is to make sure that your company lawyers and public relations officers are familiar with the plan. Many people worry about disclosing a breach because it makes the company look bad, but think about this. Is it worse to hide a breach and then let it accidentally get discovered and leaked to the media, or to honestly own up to it from the beginning and show everyone how you're dealing with it? Most cybersecurity specialists will choose the latter. So what some public relations teams and organizations do is they'll script out responses word for word of what they will say in the case of an attack. This isn't strictly necessary. Instead, you could just have kind of a rough overview of what you would like your team to put out to the media. Documentation and clarity can also make or break a plan. So sometimes the incident response plan that's been laid out for attacks is very generic, it's not clear, and it's just too little to guide specific actions during an attack. So make sure that your plan is defined and easy to understand. When somebody hears the news that, hey, the company bank account is being drained and all the systems are going down, they really don't want to have a one-page document saying stop the threat. That's just not helpful. But on the flip side, they also don't want to have a 40-page document full of technical jargon they don't understand. So you have to make sure that your plan falls kind of in the happy medium between these two extremes. It should be short and practical enough for your people to get through it quickly, but it should also be descriptive enough for them to know what to do. And one great way to make sure that this is the case is to practice using it, as I mentioned earlier. But above all, you just have to be realistic with your plan. Nothing is foolproof and nothing works 100% of the time. Obviously, having 0 cyber incidents ever would be great, but in all likelihood, it won't happen, especially if your organization is large or is an attractive target to hackers. Having a cyber incident is not the end of the world, just like having somebody getting into your building is not the end of the world. But how you can deal with it will mean everything.
And so now I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking specifically about ransomware attacks as well as data backups because of their relationship to each other, but also just the importance individually. So far, we've gone over a lot of the basics of incident response planning, so the necessary preparation, roles, response, and goals, and now we'll briefly look more into these two topics. And so just as a refresher for anybody who might need it, a ransomware attack is where the adversary or attacker essentially locks up data by encrypting it, because then they can then demand from their victims money in order for them to get back their data. Otherwise, a hacker can threaten to release it to the public or delete it entirely. And so ransomware itself is a type of malware or malicious software. Although aside from ransomware attacks, DDoS attacks or distributed denial of service attacks are also very prominent. DDoS attacks are where an attacker's goal is to disrupt the normal traffic of a server, service, or network, oftentimes by overloading it with data. And so clearly, different types of attacks are going to require different response procedures. But since it's just not possible to plan for every single potential attack, you can plan for a few main ones and then have another plan that could potentially apply to various other scenarios in case something like that comes up. And so some basic bases to have covered are the theft of intellectual property, the theft of customer or employee information, social engineering attacks, DDoS attacks, and ransomware attacks. So these are some of the basic bases that companies like AT&T recommend should be given attention first when planning. And so something that's actually pretty consistent before I talk about backing up data with all plans involving large threats is contacting the authorities, because authorities in the case of a ransomware attack, for example, can help confirm that the threat is real, and they can tell you how much of what the hacker is claiming they can actually do is the truth. So you want to make sure that you do that firsthand so you can get an idea of what they can actually do and what type of scenario you're in. then on to backing up data. So one plan when hit with a ransomware attack could include shutting down infected machines and getting new ones recreated from backups as soon as possible. Server downtime sometimes is the best way to prevent further damage, although as Catherine mentioned earlier, this could be a huge financial loss, and so companies really need to find the balance that's going to work for them. And so seeing as a server downtime might be frightening, that can definitely be a backup plan. Having backup plans built into your IRP is essential. Even though some people might view the IRP itself as a backup plan, that's not the case, and you should have a few routes that you can take in case things go wrong within the plan. And so the first plan a company might choose to go with could include launching an attack against the DDoS to protect vulnerable systems, and then reinforcing their defenses to prevent further attacks by the adversary if they, for example, attempt to extort you for even more money. And so seeing as your backed up data is important since it can be central to one of your response plans, it is equally as important to conduct test restorations beforehand to verify the integrity of the data and also to provide confidence in the data restoration capabilities just to make sure everybody knows how it works. And okay, so another quick poll time. You should hopefully all be seeing a poll pop up on your screens right now. I'll give everybody some time to choose an option. Perfectly. Okay, so again, we're gonna jump back to ransomware real quick. So I just want to know, when would you guys pay the ransom? Immediately, I want my data back. After some time passes, you want to try other options first, or never, no way I'm paying the ransom. So again, this is purely what you think, because I will discuss the results in a minute. We'll give everybody about 30 seconds, and then I will tie this in to data backups in a moment. Perfect. Okay. So majority of people say never, no way I'm paying the ransom, but also a good deal of people say immediately and after some time passes. Okay, so ideally, Catherine, if you do next slide, please.
Sorry, one moment. Technical.
All good.
Yes. There we go.
Awesome. Yeah, so ideally, people would never pay the ransom. Having reliable data backup will lead to a higher chance of you not having to pay the ransom if you're hit with a ransomware attack, because you will now have access to your data, thereby removing the leverage that the adversary holds over you. Paying the ransom, while it eventually might seem like that's your best option to make your problems go away, or it might seem like the best thing to do immediately, this actually funds the next attack that the adversary will launch on you, and it might be launched on you or somebody else. And so there's no guarantee, because they are a criminal, that they're going to stop extorting your company once you pay them. And so you don't want their attack to be profitable. That's what it ultimately comes down to. You want to take away their incentive to attack you.
So in conclusion, to help your organization work through some of these concepts and begin building an effective plan, the NeoCyber Institute is beginning to conduct free security consults focused on reforming existing IRPs or building them from scratch. So we'll take your organization through a tabletop exercise modeling the real threat, personalized for your organization, and we'll make sure to include interactive aspects to keep everyone engaged. If you or your company is interested in working with us, contact me or Madeline at the addresses on the screen. So with that, Madeline will be giving a brief overview of the conference and introducing our first speaker.
Yes, so now we'd like to introduce our amazing speaker lineup that we have today. A few of them are going to touch on topics that we briefly mentioned in our talk today, as well as go into depth on completely different topics. But before we get to that, here's an overview of the remainder of the conference, just because several speakers today are going to be tight on time, and so we want to maximize the time they have to talk by doing the longer introductions now. Our first speaker is going to be Dan Lorman, but I will introduce him last just so that it leads into his talk. And so our second speaker today will be Kristen Judge. Kristen is the founder and CEO of the Cybercrime Support Network. In her talk, she will do a deep dive into finance as it relates to cyber attacks, so the financial loss suffered, as well as where businesses can report crime and ask for help, what coordinated resources are available from different levels of law enforcement, and more about cybercrime victims. And so following Kristen will be Perry Carpenter, Chief Evangelist and Strategy Officer at the company KnowBe4 that specializes in security awareness training, particularly for social engineering, spear phishing, ransomware attacks, and more. Perry is also the author of the highly acclaimed book, Transformational Security Awareness: What Neuroscientists, Storytellers, and Marketers Can Teach Us About Driving Secure Behaviors. His talk is going to center around designing security programs that are going to work with human nature. He will also talk a little bit about the psychology involved, I believe, and how to reinforce good behaviors. And so following Perry will be Tony Dale. Tony is a former Texas state representative and director of cybersecurity at the Lower Colorado River Authority. He'll be speaking about how you can operationalize cybersecurity awareness training so that, again, the human aspect works for it, not against it. And then to end our conference, we're going to have an awesome CISO panel discussion and AMA, or Ask Me Anything, for which our panelists will be Andy Steingrubel, CSO at Pinterest, Jeff Corman, the CEO at the company eCISO, Steve Gentry, the former CISO at Workfront, and David Spark, the producer and co-host, I believe, of CISO Series podcast. And so the audience members, right now, you can definitely start thinking about questions you would like to ask, because that is what's going to drive this panel session, as well as all the other talks before this. And so, like I mentioned before, our first speaker today will be Dan Lorman. Dan is the CSO at Security Mentor and is the first CSO of Michigan. He will speak about the important things to consider when building an effective information security awareness program. As he will explain more about, what makes an effective program is the right combination of skills, knowledge, executive support, and resources. So Dan, I know we ended a few minutes early, but if you're on, you can take it away when you're ready, or we can give you a minute.